those of us in the industry maybe realize this more than others, but especially the retail public, they don't realize that a company in Turkey doesn't just borrow in Turkish lira. We've seen this year a number of countries come out and say that we are going to de-dollarize. And it's very easy to say that. It's very hard to actually do it. The process of de-dollarization is not a peaceful one. The PBOC in China had to dramatically weaken monetary policy to deal with the real estate market, and they have a lot of US dollar debt as well. So the point I make is that it was when the dollar started going higher that it's a crisis, not when it goes lower. If it goes lower, which I don't rule out, it's possible. It's maybe they can get the dollar to go lower and we won't have this crisis. But to me, if that happens, people will just keep using the dollar because now the dollar's cheaper. They'll borrow more in dollars because the dollar's cheaper. And what I think sometimes people don't know, especially the retail public, I think those of us in the industry maybe realize this more than others, but especially the retail public, they don't realize that a company in Turkey doesn't just borrow in Turkish lira. Because if they borrow in Turkish lira, the interest rate they pay is going to be dramatically higher than the rate they pay if they borrow in dollars. Same in China, same in Japan, same in Indonesia, same in Brazil. And so a lot of these countries will issue US dollar debt because their financing is lower. The financing costs are lower. And that works out fine as long as the dollar is getting weaker. Again, the problem becomes if the dollar starts going up, let's say you take out a loan and it costs you 8%, right? And you're in Brazil, you take out a US dollar loan and the rate on it is 8%. That's fine. But then if the US dollar goes up 10% versus the real, now you're really paying 18% that year because it's the currency is 10% more expensive. And so that's when you really start to get into trouble. And I just don't think the world has a solution for this. We've seen this year a number of countries come out and say that we are going to de-dollarize. And it's very easy to say that. It's very hard to actually do it, right? How do you pay off that debt? To go to something else, you first have to pay off what you've already borrowed. And, that's much easier. It's much easier said than done.
Well, let's get into that point because I think there are two key pushbacks to the theory you've laid out.
Yeah.
The dollar retains its reserve currency status and money goes back to the dollar. One of them is what I call the here and now. The other is historical, and we can come back to that in a minute. But in terms of the here and now, you mentioned the idea of commodities, and you mentioned the idea of paying de-dollarizing. And of course, we're at a stage in the world, and actually to wind back a step, I think to your point about, and for the listener, the dollar reserve currency status means that 70 or 80% of world trade is done in dollars. 2/3 of the world's financial assets are priced in dollars, and most people's central banks' reserve currencies are in dollars. So, to your point, the world is a dollar-based financial system, and you need dollars to pay for overseas commodities, to do overseas trade. So every country needs it. To your Turkey point. So, with that in mind, though. The de-dollarization, this is one of the things the market's getting excited about, and of the view that, the trends are accelerating, and they've started accelerating, obviously, since we had Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and Russia started selling all its commodities to China and the China sphere, and China insisted on doing the business in yuan. I noticed that Reuters had an article the other day suggesting that for the first time ever, China's cross-border trade over its own border has been more in renminbi than it has been in dollars. So 48% renminbi, a bit less than that in dollars, first time ever. But that's only their trade. Only 5% of global trade is in renminbi versus, I think, 85 or something like that in dollars. But the point is, there's now a growing multilateral world with two spheres. There's the sort of US Western-centric sphere, and then there's the China and Shanghai Security Cooperation sphere. Yep. And I think the geopolitics in the last 12 months has been utterly fascinating and actually pretty surprising. Surprising to see China broker a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, something, America and the West haven't managed for a few decades, and they seem like sworn enemies. They're now both entering into the Shanghai Agreement. They're sort of joining partners. I forget what the term is, associate partners or something.
Yeah.
So, the spheres are growing, and the internationalization of the renminbi is growing. Absolutely. It's nothing like where the dollar is, but it's certainly accelerating. The geopolitics is clearly driving that. I don't know where you sit on that, because I would add one bit more to that. I mean, the whole chat that the global South is signing up, whether it's Latin America or large parts of Africa, with China. So there's this swathe of land you can see extending from LATAM through parts of Africa up into Asia, which is really starting to become China's sphere. So that's the thing I find interesting, and that's the argument sort of Wall Street makes, that maybe the dollar's demise is closer than we realize.
Well, so I think there's two parts of that for me. There's actually three parts. First of all, I agree that it is happening, or it's attempting to be done. But one thing I would say is that this, and it's definitely picking up. And with the U.S. quote unquote weaponizing the dollar a year ago, they've kind of forced this issue in many ways. And I think Putin even made the case, we're not leaving the dollar left us. Something to that effect, because we cut them out, and it wasn't his choice, to leave the dollar. He's been working to be ready for it, but we're the ones that cut him off. He didn't come out and say we're no longer doing it. And so, in some cases, countries are being forced to come up with de-dollarization methods. The other thing I would say is that the process of de-dollarization is not a peaceful one. So, and what I mean by that, I mean that both geopolitically / militarily and economically. So, okay, so let's dig into that a little bit deeper. There's no doubt. I mean, all you have to do is open up a newspaper or go on some, financial blog, and, de-dollarization, the G7 versus the BRICS, it's kind of all over the place. So this global South, the BRICS, are definitely, without question, trying to do everything they can to de-dollarize and get into a system that they're not kind of beholden to the U.S. and the U.S. dollar.